It's a day when we honor the absolute, some of the most important people in our lives. And for many of us, we have to think about what that means to be a mother, right? As I mentioned before in my prayer, some of us might have a bit of a skewed relationship with our mothers. I was incredibly blessed that I still have a relationship with my mother. I grew up with an amazing mother who has always been very good to me. And now I'm even lucky enough that I've got a second mother that I've married into. And so I have been very blessed on that front. But I know that not everyone has had that same experience. Perhaps the word mother creates a sort of visceral reaction in you. And maybe it's not, maybe it's because you had a wonderful relationship with your mother. But, time has taken her away. Or perhaps you have found yourself never with the opportunity to be a mother, even though that's what you desperately wanted. Or maybe, as I also said, you didn't have a good relationship with your mother. Perhaps your mother didn't treat you well, and so you had no choice but to end that relationship. Whatever it may be, mothers are still crucial in our lives. And one of the reasons why we made sure that when you came in, some of you might have laughed at this. And I know some of you came in who I might have missed before the service started. I tried to go and personally hand a bar of chocolate to every single woman who walked through the doors, not just mothers. Some of you might have been like, wait a second, it's like, do you know something I don't? Call in and give me a bar of candy saying Happy Mother's Day. I don't think I'm being a mother. Some of you might have thought that, but the idea is that all of you women here today are incredibly strong. And no doubt you have been through experiences that I can't even fathom. And I know that when I was young, and I mentioned I had a wonderful mother, my mom was also in a rough place because she was a single mom, and she had to do a lot. And she had a lot put on her shoulders, and paying for a family by herself was a big pressure. And so she was gone a lot, working at the bank to make sure that we had a home and food on the table. And so there was a lot of my experience when I was younger where my mother wasn't there. But I was blessed in an interesting way in that my aunt, my mom's sister, stepped in and took care of us a lot of the time. And at that time, I know she wasn't a mother biologically, but she stepped in and did a lot for my family and really made a big difference in my life. And so on Mother's Day, I always, thank both my mother and my aunt, and as well as the many, many incredible women that I have encountered in my life, whether it's through church or whether it's through school. I've had some great teachers who have impacted my life. And so today, if you are here and you are a woman and you have different levels of how much you may feel like a mother, you are still, in some way, making an impact in the lives of the people you encounter. And so I want you to remember that. And so every one of you, all you women, get some chocolate. Make sure that I come and speak with you if I haven't had the chance already, so you can get some candy, because everybody wants that. And so in the spirit of this idea of how incredibly important you women are and how important mothers are, today we're going to talk about a story that's kind of about a non-traditional mother relationship. I'll warn you, we're going to go for a crazy ride today because we're going to talk about an entire book of the Bible. So do you guys have a couple hours? I'm thinking just an hour or two per chapter, and we can get out of here maybe by 7 p.m., and I think we'll be good to go, right? No, I'm just kidding. The book we're going over today is pretty short, and I will go through it pretty quickly and hit the broad strokes. I promise you I'll only take up a few hours of your time. But, not really. My ADHD won't let me do that. I'll lose focus and start getting distracted while I'm even up here talking. But we're going to talk about the book of Ruth today. This is a story you've maybe heard 100 times over, and I think a lot of the times it's a book where they talk about kind of the love aspect between Ruth and her eventual husband, Boaz. You know, that's a big focus that is put on the book, and it absolutely should be a lot of the time because it is a great story about how Ruth was redeemed through the actions of Boaz and how incredible that was. But the book is called Ruth for a reason. It's called Ruth for a very important reason. Because Ruth is the key figure in the story, and what I think the most important relationship in the book of Ruth is between Ruth and her mother-in-law, Naomi. And so we begin this story in the very first chapter. You guys are going to want to go ahead and open your Bibles up to Ruth. And you're going to want to go ahead and get those fingers ready for flipping because we're going all over 4 chapters, okay? So keep up if you can. Don't worry, we're going to mostly paraphrase stuff. But we're going to start in the very first chapter of the book of Ruth. And we get sort of the framing begins here as we're told about who Naomi is. And we're given the context for her situation. And so Naomi is a woman who is born in the land of Judah, in Bethlehem specifically. You may have heard that before, right? This is the place of God's people. And she is there, and she is married, and she has 2 sons. And eventually tragedy strikes Judah as the whole land is in famine. It means they don't have enough food. They don't have these Hershey with almonds bars to live off of. They have nothing to eat. And so Naomi, their husband, make the difficult decision to move to the land of Moab. And Moab, it's a totally different place for them, a totally different culture, a land that is different from their ancestors. And there they have to make residence. But while they're living there, another tragedy strikes. I'm thinking, man, this Naomi lady is really unlucky. And her husband dies. He passes away. Of course, thankfully for her, she still has her 2 sons. And eventually those 2 sons marry 2 Moabite women. Now I've got to pull my notes very carefully and read this because I always mess up one of these names. And you're going to laugh when I tell you why. Because she had 2 new daughters that were married to her sons. And their names were Orpah. I always have to read it because my dyslexia always wants me to read that as Oprah. And I think that's just very funny. I always read, I'm like, Oprah's in the Bible? Whoa. But it's Orpah. Orpah, keep me on my toes. All right, guys, if I mess it up, call me out. She's not in the story too long, so it doesn't matter. Spoilers. And the other one is Ruth. Now, once again, if the name of the book or my previous statements didn't give it away, Ruth's going to be pretty important. So keep her in mind. So Naomi, her 2 sons, their 2 new wives, Orpah and Ruth, live in Moab. For 10 years, they live together there. And then, wouldn't you believe it, but tragedy strikes again. Naomi's 2 sons pass away. We're not told why. We aren't told why, but I'm just like, what on earth? The men in this family, there is something going on. And they all pass away. Naomi has no husband and no sons. And only 2 daughters from a foreign country, not daughters of her own blood, daughters through marriage. Well, sort of thankfully, back in the land of Judah, the famine has ended. So Naomi makes the tough decision to return home. She has nothing left, though. No family. Nothing to go back to in Judah. And so she tells her daughters-in-law, goes to Orpah and says, go back home to your family, to where you were born, and start a new family. Find a good life. Don't let me hold you back. Orpah, of course, thanks her and leaves. And now she's out of the story, and my dyslexia will no longer get in the way for the rest of this. But then she goes to Ruth, and she tells Ruth, go home. Start a new family. Move on without me. You're still young. You're still beautiful. You've got a great life ahead of you. You've got a great head on your shoulders. You're going to do fine, Ruth. And Ruth says the strangest thing, in which, of course, I think it's funny to think of in our culture. We kind of have a habit of like poking fun at the sort of like daughter-in-law, mother-in-law relationship, right? We kind of have it's got a bad reputation to it, doesn't it? And yet we see here just an incredible thing. And Ruth says in chapter 1, verse 16, Ruth replies, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. And so when Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. And so the story of Ruth is a story of loyalty and faithfulness. Because Ruth was truly, to her core, a faithful person. She was faithful to Naomi, her mother. She was faithful to Boaz, which we'll see in a little bit. And she was faithful to God. A God from a foreign land, a God who she had only probably recently begun to know. But she realized that she wanted to stay faithful. And so she chose to go back to Judah. No money, nothing to call her own, but the relationship of a mother and a daughter who weren't related by blood, but were connected through faith. And so today we are going to look at, throughout this whole book, we're going to see how the faithfulness of Ruth changed her life and the lives of those around her. And how in the same way we may be able to look at the women in our lives and see how their incredible faithfulness, whether it's your own mother or whether it's someone you just knew who treated you well, and we're going to see how that faithfulness truly makes a difference. And so the first point about her faithfulness I want to make is that Ruth's faithfulness, it brought her and Naomi protection. Okay, if we go to the second chapter here, okay, now remember, we're going to be flipping back to the first chapter in a little bit, so you got to stay on your toes. I'm going all over the place, back and forth. And we see in the second chapter, starting in verse 11, okay, pause there for a second. I'm going to give us more context before we read it, but be ready. That's what we're going to read in a moment. Ruth has traveled back to Judah with Naomi, and they're there, and they're trying to settle in, and Naomi goes specifically to a place where she's like, hey, I've got a couple of relatives over this way. Let's go and see how things are going. And she's like, well, I have a distant relative named Boaz. Perhaps we can go, and he might be a redeemer for us. And in the culture of this time, it was a thing where, if you lost a husband or like a woman was left on her own, essentially, there would be family members who would come in and care for them. And so, of course, they had almost no connection with him. They'd been out of the country for so long. It was hard to remake the connection, but they went and they tried. And Ruth was determined to go and work in the fields there and just ask for the leavings behind from as the people are going through the field and picking grain and taking that. Ruth wanted to go in behind them and say, hey, I'm not going to steal the good stuff, but whatever the stuff that's not good enough that falls on the ground that you leave behind, I will take that. And that's how me and Naomi will survive. An incredible act of selflessness to go and do this work for her and her mother. And while she's out there doing that, Boaz notices her, and he talks to some of his workers, and he's like, who on earth is this young woman who's doing work very unbefitting for her? Because again, she's young. She could easily be doing anything else, but she's here working in the fields, picking up our leavings. What on earth is she doing? And she talked to them, and they said, it's like, oh, well, her name's Ruth. She's from Moab, but she's traveled here with her mother, and they're trying to just get enough food to get by. And so, like, she's been working steadily since the wee hours of the morning. It's incredible. And so Boaz then goes to her, and he speaks with her, and that's where we're at in verse 11. He says, I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. And so Ruth says, may I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord. You have given me comfort and have spoken kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servant girls. And at mealtime, Boaz said to her, come over here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar. And when she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. As she got up to glean, which is to go and gather the leftover wheat, like I mentioned before, she got up to go and glean. Boaz gave orders to his men. Even if she gathers among the sheaves, don't embarrass her. Rather, pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her. So, having witnessed the incredible faithfulness of Ruth, the willingness to give up everything that she knows and loves to care for her mother-in-law, no less. Having seen this, Boaz and all of his workers, they are humbled by it. They're like, wow, what an incredible person to sacrifice so much. And so as a result, they provide for them. They make sure that they have enough to eat. And not just the worst leavings. He says, hey, pick out some of the good stuff and give it to them too. Make sure they have everything they need. So this faithfulness, it wasn't just an act, an empty promise. She went and she put in the work, and as a result of this, they were rewarded. They found the food and the shelter and the care that they needed in this trying time. And I can think of so many times in my life, you know, when I mentioned before, my family didn't come from the greatest situation, and we were in a rough place a lot of times when I was younger. And I can think of how incredible and giving and faithful so many of the women in my life were. People that would bring meals to my family and care for us, pray over us, come and sneak us a little bit of extra money under the table and say, hey, here you go. It's a little birthday gift for you. Colin, go get yourself something nice. Because they knew my family couldn't afford a lot, but these incredible women that I knew from my church did so much for me. And we were provided for. We were cared for. Through the faithfulness of incredible women in our lives. Just like Ruth. Someone who provided for Naomi. But not just that. Ruth's faithfulness brought hope into the life of Naomi. Okay, now here's the part where I told you we're going to be flipping around. We're going to go back one chapter, although it's not too far. If you've got a big enough Bible, you may not even have to flip a page at all, because I don't. We can see that when Naomi and Ruth return to Judah, and Naomi meets some people there, and they're talking to her, and they're saying, hey, is that Naomi? Like people that once knew her, you know, the decade plus before she had left. And when they come up and they greet her, like, hey, Naomi, it's you. How's it going? Naomi says this, starting in chapter 1, verse 20. She says, don't call me Naomi. call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away fully, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. Some harsh words, right? Now, I got to give you a little bit of detail there. Naomi is a name that means pleasant. We know a little bit about pleasant things, don't we? Pleasant. And as she says here, Mara means bitter. And she's like, when I left here, my life was pleasant. I was full of love, full of hope. I had a husband. I had 2 sons. I had everything I could possibly want. And now I come back empty, bitter, cold. Life had taken so much from Naomi. And so when she thought of God, she couldn't see pleasantness. She wasn't pleased. It tasted bitter in her mouth. Can you imagine? I think many of us can. That you've been in a point in your life where stuff just is so bad that the thought of the good things you once experienced has turned to ash. And it's just left a bad sensation. And we can't help it, right? Like, it's a perfectly normal thing to then think on God and think on Him and be angry and be bitter and think, God, why have you forsaken me? Right? Why have you taken this away from me? Or why have you not provided what I so desperately needed? Why do I suffer? And I think we've all been in that place. I think if you say you haven't been, you might be lying a little bit, or you might just be ignorant of something, but we've all struggled. We've had times where our faith has wavered. But Ruth stuck it out with her. All right, get those flipping fingers ready, all right? Because now we're jumping to the last chapter, chapter 4, to the conclusion of this story. And so as Boaz had reached out to Ruth, had provided for her, and eventually Ruth goes and he asks her, will you be our redeemer? Will you take us in? Will you provide for us? Remember, because a redeemer would come in, it would be a relative of a family who would take on all the debt that a family owes, right? All this money they might owe, all the needs they have, and bring them into their family. And it would be so that that family line would not end. And it would continue. And they go to him and they say, please, will you be our redeemer? And Boaz eventually does. He chooses to marry Ruth. And ultimately brings great fortune to their family, to both her and Naomi as well. And in chapter 4, starting with verse 13, we see that Boaz took Ruth in and she became his wife. And then in verse 14, she gave birth. She has a son. The women said to Naomi, praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. And then Naomi took the child, laid him in her lap, and cared for him. So just 3 chapters earlier, we see this woman who is just in despair. She has nothing left. And the last moment, the last mention of her here is with a baby in her arms. A grandson. Someone to carry on her family. And they say, you are blessed, Naomi. Can you believe that? Just a few chapters earlier, this woman said that the Lord had abandoned her and took all blessings away. But through that faithfulness of Ruth, her hope was restored. Blessings were brought back into her life. And this to me is absolutely incredible here, where it's talking about, it says, your daughter-in-law who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons. Okay, nowadays some of you girls are like, yeah, I know it. I got a bunch of brothers and I'm better than all of them. That's probably true. But in this case, you got to think about this culture and how much, like, honestly, women weren't worth a whole lot to some people. Like, a lot of people would not be happy if they had a daughter. They'd rather have a son. And as sad as it is to think about, knowing how much invaluable women are to our society and our life, a lot of people would say, oh yeah, I'd rather have a bunch of sons. But here they're saying, oh my gosh, this incredible, faithful woman, Ruth, is better than 7 sons. That is an insane compliment. That is such high praise. To say that she is worth so much to your life. What she has done is incredible. And it wasn't like Ruth did any impressive feats of intelligence or strength, or it wasn't like she tricked anybody. It had to be clever. All right, it's not like a Bilbo Baggins situation for you nerds out there like me. She didn't have to solve riddles and things like that. No, this quest was just her being faithful, her being loving, her caring for her mother, her being there for her, not giving up on her. That faithfulness to Naomi and to God. In that moment, when Naomi wanted to give everything up, she wanted to forsake God, she wanted to forsake her daughters-in-law, she wanted to forsake her family, her life, everything, and just become bitter and give up. But Ruth's faith kept strong, and it saved Naomi, even when she had given up on herself. How incredible was that faith of a seemingly insignificant foreign girl. I mean, can you imagine someone worth less in that society? Someone from a different country, because they're not supposed to like intermingle and marry with other countries, right? Like that's really frowned upon in that time. For this person, this foreigner, to come in, to be young, have no title, have no land, have nothing to her name, from a strange land in a new place, and purely through love, she changed so much. And that's not all. As we can see in the final verses of this book, in verse 17, it says, the women there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. And I think a lot of you probably know who David is in context of the Bible, right? Ruth's faithfulness led to an even better future. The stuff Ruth and Naomi did here, wow. The ripples that would have throughout time and the future would eventually leave it, within a single generation, not even a long time. It was, a grandchild was David, the future king. And through the line of David, who eventually came, but Jesus. She could have never known how much what she did would matter. And it may seem in those moments, and you might think this, when I think of all the things that my mother did for me, that my aunt did for me, that my grandmother did for me, that the church ladies who took care of me did for me, that the women of this church do for me, I get teary-eyed. Because could they have known? Could they have known the impact they would have on my life? Do you know the impact you have? Do you realize how great it is? It's kind of scary, isn't it? To think that what we do now can affect generations down the line. The goodness that you show, the faithfulness that you show. Just a little sweetness like that candy bar that you show can truly make a difference. It's the faithfulness of Ruth that changed the world. Your faithfulness can do the same. So mothers, women everywhere, all of you, thank you. Thank you for all you do. And I know that there are days when you wake up and everything just tastes bitter, right? And it just feels miserable. And you wonder why you bother. Man, I can think for a fact, my mom probably thought that a couple times with me. I could not have been easy to raise. And I know a couple of you probably are the same as I was. But it matters. What you do matters. Whether you're a biological mother, or whether you chose to adopt, or whether you just say hey to the people in your life and you love on them and you're good to them, then that shows great faithfulness that God smiles upon each and every day. So don't let up on that. Let that love and faith carry you through. Will you pray with me? Father God, as we look at the story of Ruth and Naomi, a story of hardship, a story of tragedy, of lost love, but also new love and renewal and joy and salvation. And so much of our lives, Lord, we can see follow a similar pattern of pains and joy. Father, don't let those pains overwhelm us and blind us from your goodness and your grace. For Father, as Boaz was a redeemer for Ruth and Naomi, you in the same way have redeemed us through Naomi's descendant, Jesus Christ. As we have been redeemed by your name, and that bitterness turns to joy. Father, do not look away from us, but shine your light down upon all of the women and the men here within this church, Lord. This is not a message just for one gender. This is not a message just for one type of person. This is not a message just for mothers or for fathers or for daughters or for sons or whatever. This is a message for all of your children. Father, provide for us your incredible grace, and let us always remain faithful to you. And we ask this in your powerful, mighty, loving, and faithful name. Amen.